I would like to address a few things at the beginning of the class. Today we will talk about we will finish the 6 entrances of the Surangama Sutra. Tomorrow is Sunday, and then day after tomorrow, Monday, we will not have class then. In the next few days, we will spend the time to practice the confession liturgy attentively, and we will not have class then. I hope everyone will be able to finish the 400,000 Vajrasattva mantra. It would be the best for you to finish it within 1 week. But for those people who are extremely busy, work for 12 to 24 hours a day, then you can finish it by the end of Sagadawa. I myself have already finished tens of thousands. I feel I've been pretty good so far. Every year during Sagadawa, I feel that there will be some of the mantra that's left to be finished every year. Therefore, this year I really want to finish it. And I really would ask all of you to finish chanting the 400,000 within this month. Because our life is so impermanent. We would never know when we will part from this life, when we will part from this world. Because life is just like a water bubble. It's very fragile. I think if we can engage in the confession liturgy attentively and with great focus, it will be really wonderful. We will definitely be able to confess all of our negative deeds if we were to practice wholeheartedly. So we need to be prepared for our future life. Therefore, it would be the best for you not to look for all kinds of excuses to say that I'm not in good health and I have lots of work, so on and so forth. If we try our best, I'm sure we will be able to finish the 400,000 times of Vajrasattva mantra. If you have the ability to practice the visualization while doing it, that would be even better. Now we still have a large Sangha to practice with, and I think this kind of opportunity would be harder and harder to get in the future. When it is our time to part from this world, I hope that we will not have regret. This time I have no plan to give other teachings during this particular time. I've given a lot of teachings. Everyone has the material to study all the way from the morning to evening. I think we have a sufficient amount of studying materials. So it is time to engage in the actual practice. Also, because of the pandemic, it is not a good time to travel around. It's not convenient at all. Therefore, unless it is out of urgent or health situations that you really have to part from Larangar, you're permitted to do so. But if you're just traveling around, this is not the time. Especially in our county, in such a small place, though that it's small, it is under strict control. Such kind of control and management can be a protection for the life and can be a good security and safety protection. Today, I sent out the announcement on the Weblog, and I said that unfortunately this year we're not going to have the Vajrasattva Dharma Assembly, and I wish everyone will chant the Vajrasattva mantra at your own place, wherever you are. We have no idea when such obstacles will part, but for now, if you have the opportunity to practice at your home, you have all the food that you can eat, and you can have all your provisions, and you enjoy the comfort of your own home and practice the mantra. This would be really wonderful. Now, if you can practice for 7 days in retreat to practice the mantra, that would be really wonderful. Especially this month is the Sagadawa. It has the 3 special holidays: the day that Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment, the day of birth, and the day of parinirvana of the Buddha. This is quite crucial for a Buddhist to practice during this special time. If we can practice diligently, and if we can chant the mantras and practice whatever kinds of virtuous deeds, this would be really auspicious. So I hope that you can try your best to finish chanting the Vajrasattva mantra. I will not remind you again in the middle of it. If you are aware of the importance of it, you will definitely practice it. In mainland China, usually there's a tradition of a 7-day meditation retreat. So this is also our version of the 7-day retreat. It's a 7-day retreat of chanting Vajrasattva to repent wholeheartedly, to make such confession so that all of our negative deeds can be purified. I think we're still quite fortunate, because before our death, we still have this opportunity to make confession. We practice with so many Sangha members, with so many monastics, and I'm sure there are the noble ones among us as well. If we can chant for example, aspiration of Samadhabhadra, that would be supreme causes and conditions that some people would have to accumulate for hundreds of lifetimes. So we should practice with this cherishing mind and practice with joyfulness. Now in Larong Gar, since we don't have class, if you were to hide at your home and simply sleep for 7 days, or watch all kinds of short videos, surfing online, so on and so forth, this is not very graceful, especially since you stay in this supreme sacred site of Buddhism. If you do not practice the Dharma, then it would be the best for you not to wear this sacred robe. Because when we talk about the monastic, we are talking about the one who renounced not just in terms of their appearance, but generated a true renunciation. That is the value that we need to have to seek for true liberation. Now, we are going to begin our class on the Surangama Sutra. Today we're going to finish the 6 entrances. 6 entrances meaning the 6 faculties or 6 roots, or the 6 organs, sense organs. Previously, we've already talked about how you should know that the eye entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. It could apply to the nose, to the ears. Now we've already talked about the eyes, the nose, and the ears. We've already talked about whatever is seen, the seeing, the hearing, and the smelling. In fact, there is no substance to it. And then the next part, we're going to look at the tongue. Ananda, the Buddha said, consider, for example, a person who licks his lips with his tongue. He excessively licking causes fatigue. If the person is sick, there will be a bitter flavor. If a person who is not sick will have a subtle sweet sensation. Sweetness and bitterness demonstrate the tonsils of taste. Whenever we rely on the tongue faculty, we taste. In terms of taste, according to the Gateway to Knowledge as well as Abhidharma, there are different categories such as bitter, spicy, sour, sweet, and savory and salty. And there are the mixed flavor, there are the pleasant and unpleasant. There are different types of taste. All kinds of tastes. Now the Buddha gives an example first, and then he would analyze it, and then at the end, the Buddha would demonstrate the conclusion that everything's empty. The Buddha told Ananda, saying that if a person were to excessively licking his mouth, after a long period of time, after licking for a long period of time, then the lips will get fatigued, and at that time you will have a special taste.
好像那个宣化上人说呢，就是说是，自己问自己，就是自己亲自己，就是尤其是没有朋友的人，自己拼命。
I think Master Xuanhua, the way he explained it was that one kissing oneself.
是天的意思，就是主要是这个色土就是天嘛，就是天自
But
己的。
this particular Chinese term means licking. And it means that using the tongue to lick the lips. So I tried licking during the lunchtime, and maybe because I don't have good health, so I taste a little bitterness. Therefore, the Buddha said that if the person is sick, there will be a bitter flavor. In the traditional Chinese medicine, we also talk about how there are different ways of observing the patients, and one of which is asking about the flavors that the patients taste in their mouth. The Buddha said that if this person is sick, then this person will taste the bitter flavor, but if a person who is healthy, then the person will have a subtle sweet sensation. But there is nothing there. The person is not eating anything, so how could there be bitterness or sweetness? There's some very special causes and conditions that is taking effect. When the organ is inactive, a sense of tastelessness prevails. So whatever it is, let it be bitterness or sweetness, it appears mainly because the organ is active. But when the organ is inactive, a sense of tastelessness prevails, a sense of a very, very subtle taste. There is not much of a taste. Tastelessness. Just like whenever you lick your lip right now, you don't taste anything. However, if you keep fatiguing your tongue, then there is the false conviction that would appear, a sense of illusion. It is not existent in reality. However, both the tongue and the fatigue originate in bodhi. The tongue, both the tongue and the fatigue. The tongue usually could taste all kinds of flavor, which is the true convention, and then the false convention, which is the fatigue that caused the subtle bitterness or sweetness that was described earlier. But they both originate in the bodhi. This is very similar to the fatigue of the eye and the previous examples as well. And then over here it says that they both originate in Bodhi. There is really no substance to such kinds of flavor. Whenever we use our tongue to lick, for example, licking a candy or something bitter, like a bitter melon, or something rather stringent, such as stinky tofu and so on and so forth. Sometimes they look really good, but then when you taste it, they taste a bit, it has a sense of stench to it. In Chengdu, if you know the Sichuan cuisine, lots of the young people really likes to eat those kebab-like skewers. There was this one side I saw a long line of young people trying to line up to get into this particular restaurant and buy things over there. So I lined up over there as well. I pretended to be one of them, and then I lined up. But when I got closer to the food vendor, I really couldn't take that smell. It smells really terrible to me. But it seems that the university students, though those young people really enjoy this particular flavor. The sentient beings in the desire realm really attach to the flavors. But today we will be able to understand that these kinds of tastes, let it be false or true convention, they are simply illusion and they are all empty. Let's look at the next verse where it says that because the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness as well as tastelessness stimulate a recognition of taste, which in turn draws in these defiling sensations, it becomes what is known as a sense of taste. Now, let it be bitter and sweet. They are the tastes, we can call them as apparent or very obvious taste. And then the other one, which is tastelessness, is the not obvious taste. This is similar to the previously said brightness and darkness. And these two are the defiling objects. So bitterness and sweetness, those are considered as one defiling object, and the other one, the tastelessness, is as another defiling object. And now, let us make the observation, where does it come from? Over here, to use the word recognition. Sometimes we use knowing, recognition, or seeing, and there are different words. 觉知就是知的话，下面的这个意识也比较好一点，但是实际上呢，就是质问，就是主要是它那个味啊，就是味儿，就是它这个呢，就是 mainly this recognition points to knowing the taste. This is really important. Apart from the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness, and apart from tastelessness, the sense of taste is originally without a substance. Let it be bitter or sweet. In fact, they are apart from the substance that is called sweet or bitter or tastelessness. Previously, we mentioned that in some of the empowerments of Vajrayana, there are the substance of good tasting objects to be offered flavored and sometimes not good tasting ones. Some of the melodious sound sometimes is played, and sometimes the very terrible sound, very rough sound. And some of the very fragrant and some of the stench smell is sometimes presented too. But again, what one considers as fragrant may be considered as stringent as or stench to the other. In terms of tastes, some people may like sweet, some may like bitter, and some may like spicy. It is said that if you really like very strongly seasoned food, it is not healthy. If you really like the very salty, very spicy, very sweet, those are not healthy. Because the body has to take lots of effort to digest those flavors. And slowly, this is not very good for your health. Therefore, when we look at people around different places, some prefer certain tastes more than the others. I noticed that in Tibet, we really like salty food. Let it be the tsampa soup or whatever food there is. We put lots of salt. If there's not lots of salt, we feel like it is not very tasty. But slowly, we're getting more used to eat something that's less salty. The meal that's cooked in the Chinese temples in the Chinese mainland, I think their food are very healthy. But people with habitual tendency to enjoy very heavy flavored food may not be able to enjoy those. But this is really a habit that we can train so that we can be healthier. In fact, let it be whatever flavor you like. The substance of it doesn't exist at all. There is no substance to the flavor. The Buddha said that, thus, Ananda, you should know that the perception of sweetness, bitterness, and tastelessness do not come from sweetness or bitterness, or does it exist because of tastelessness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. So, this is exactly the same way, following the previous logic. You need to observe the object, the subject, which is our faculty, and then the emptiness. According to the Vajrayana teaching, though that sometimes we do observe in such a way, but usually in the Vajrayana teaching we understand this through a direct pointing out. But the Surangama uses a different way to point out the nature of the six faculties. Previously, we talked about the five skandhas, the five aggregates, and over here it talks about the emptiness of the six roots. In the Vajrayana, it talks about how the five aggregates are the five Buddhas. The five roots are also the five bodhisattvas. Now, the next part, the Buddha talks about how the so-called bitterness, sweetness, and the tastelessness, in fact, it does not come from the object. For what reason, the Buddha said, if it came from sweetness and bitterness, it would cease to exist when tastelessness were experienced. So how could it recognize tastelessness? And if it arose from tastelessness, it would vanish when flavor of sweetness was tasted. So how could it receive the two flavors, sweet and bitter? People would think that, well, there must be a flavor. When I taste the bitter melon, there is bitter, and when I eat candy, there is sweet. It definitely comes from the object. That taste, it does come from the object. However, that is just our grasping towards the true existence of the object. We grasp onto the substance or something that has a solid existent character that's attached to the object. In fact, if it were to be truly existent, then the character shouldn't switch from one place to another.
这个电视里面的人啊，或者说是幻化的像啊，或者是彩虹啊，这些
We only hold on to these kinds of flavors as objectively existent and not thinking that they are false. They are the results of causes and conditions because we hold on to them. Just like whenever we see a person in a TV or a rainbow, in fact, those are just manifestations, those are illusions. It occasionally would manifest, but then it would disappear. Therefore, the holding on to the bitter melon is bitter and the sweet candy is sweet, those are simply our graspings. The second way of observing this is suppose they came from emptiness. The sense of taste would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mouth. If the taste comes from space, then it would be experienced by emptiness, but not our mouth. But whenever we eat things, we actually taste it with our mouth. Suppose, moreover, as it was emptiness itself which tasted, what connection would that have to do with your entrance? Pardon me, I skipped a line. The second way of making observation The second way of making observation is suppose that it came from the tongue, which is obviously devoid of defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness and of tastelessness. These kinds of tastes, if it were to be derived from the subject, which is the tongue, then what's the function of object? You don't need the object of the things to be eaten, to be tasted anymore. Then we would be able to know that an essence of tasting such as this would have no self-nature. And then the next one is suppose it came from emptiness. If it came from emptiness, then the space can taste. Your mouth doesn't need to taste anymore. Furthermore, if the space can taste, then what connection would that have with your interests? Does it have anything to do with your faculty? It would no longer have any connection with your faculty anymore. Therefore, you should know that the tongue entrance is empty and false. Empty and false in the Tibetan translation, it is the false convention or convention, since it neither depends upon causes and condition for existence, nor is it spontaneous in nature. This is also really important. According to Master Oyi's commentary, he talked about a bhikshu whose name is Gavapati. This noble one, when he listened to the teaching of the nature of the tongue and he attained enlightenment. The later part of this teaching brought enlightenment to many of the noble ones in the past. When it comes to the tongue, I think we need to truly look at ourselves and apply it in our life. Sometimes when it comes to the Surangama Sutra, I try my best to explain it in terms of the literal meaning. Especially sometimes I feel that I have gained some understanding of the 5 treatises and I've gained some understanding of the Tantra teachings. Therefore, I think I give okay teachings. But sometimes maybe my teaching is not that great. But I think in terms of my point is that in terms of the literary meaning, it's easy to be expounded by you or by me. But what's really important is that if we can apply it in our real life, when it comes to the faculty of the tongue, can you look at your own experience when you taste something bitter, sour, and sweet, and so on and so forth? Would you be able to remember that it is? Would you be able to remember to make the analysis whether it arises from the object or from the faculty or from the emptiness? If you were able to make this analysis following the train of thought and analysis given by the Buddha, then enlightenment is just a matter of time. Because look at us. We have this karma that we need to eat every day, and we have this desire to eat. Look at everyone in this world. We all eat. Look at Shanghai and Beijing. They've been in a lockdown for a few months now. At the time of being out of the lockdown, the people over there spend a long time going to restaurants and kept on eating. Of course, I understand that because the sentient beings, as the beings in desire realm, we need to eat food and drink. But we need to use these experiences, especially that's taught in the Surangama Sutra. We shouldn't just rely on the words, because we can talk about words as much as we want. But when it comes to the mind, when it comes to, for example, the eye faculty, when it comes to the ear and the tongue, when we see beautiful things or ugly, or whenever we hear different sounds, whenever we smell, and then whenever we taste things, would we be able to apply those teachings in those experiences? We constantly think that we do have eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, but according to the Heart Sutra, it says there is no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body. Why is that? Can you make that observation and come to the realization that's stated in the Heart Sutra? In fact, this is why the sentient beings are confused. We constantly think that the convention, the true convention and false convention are truly existent. But once we make this analysis, we definitely see how pitiful the sentient beings are, being confused by all of those. Now, the next one, the Buddha said, Ananda, consider, for example, a person who touches his warm hand with his cold hand. If the cold is in excess to the warmth, the warm hand will then become cold. If the warmth is in excess to the cold, his cold hand will become warm. Maybe the situation is that it's in the winter, so his one hand is in the cold, but the other one is close to a fireplace. And then if the two hands were to hold each other, then the cold and warm hands would slowly get into the state of equilibrium. Just as is stated in the Mahaprajna Paramita Shastra, it says that if we were to pour boiling water on top of ice, if the ice is bigger, then the water will slowly become ice. If we were to pour a greater amount of hot water on a much smaller piece of ice, then the ice would become water. And then the Buddha said that if the cold is in excess of the warmth, then the warm hand will become cold. And if warmth is in excess of the cold, his cold hand will become warm. So the sensation of warmth and cold is felt through the contact and the separation of the two hands. It means that the sensation of touch at the time of parting becomes more obvious. The reason behind it is that while your hands are touching each other, if one particular hand has an excessive coldness or warmth, then such sensation would become more obvious at time of parting. This particular sensation is also out of fatigue.
在那个就是居士论当中，就是它以因处就因接触的处，因处，还有那个过处，就是因处的话呢，就是
In Abhidharma, it says that there are the
比如说什么这个化，就是很华丽的
causes, the place of cause, which means the four elements, and then the fruition of touch, such as the smoothness and roughness and different textures. Also, there are the lightness, heaviness, and there are the hunger, thirst, and coldness. When it comes to touch, the form, sound, smell, touch, and touch, that's one of the objects. But this particular touch is different than the form that we see through our eyes or the sound that we hear through our ears. Rather, it is more insubstantial than the others. Those of you who study Abhidharma, you should be very clear about that. Now, we've already talked about how these two, the coldness and the warmth, would balance itself through touching. Let it be cold and warmth, or let it be the sensation of hunger or sensation of heaviness, a sensation of whatever. Those kinds of sensations are also out of illusion. Whatever kinds of objects that's out there, whatever kinds of effect and different kinds of activities in the object, those are no other than the effect of causes and conditions, because it is no other than illusion. It is a character of illusion. Let it be the false convention or the true convention. All of these characteristics, the illusory characteristics, both the body and fatigue originate in Bodhi. They both originate in the nature of Bodhi, rather they're the manifestation of the Bodhi, the illusory manifestation. They're not intrinsically existent. Why are they not intrinsically existent? Their protraction produces the characteristic of fatigue, because a physical sensation is stimulated in the midst of the two defiling objects of separation and union. Defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the awareness of sensation. Whenever we have the sensation of union and separation, in fact, they are simply the two types of illusory dust.
两种王乘的话呢，实际上是这个发觉因为这个身体的话
And this is the awareness of sensation. It is associated with the faculty of body.
当中呢，就是就出现什么呢？就是它系这样的这个外面的这个触的。
And after it's manifested, it will
这个近尘就是外境的尘。这样的话呢，就是这个叫
take in the appearance.
因为身体呢，就是知道是轻的。
Because the body has the awareness that knows the lightness or heaviness. Whenever we talk about the different kinds of sensations, for example, seeing, hearing, and awareness. The seeing is associated to eyes, and hearing is to the ear, and the smelling is to the nose, and then there's the sensation. In the Tibetan language, there is a direct word that is easy to read, but in the Chinese language, to recite the different types of sensations, it's a little bit difficult to say.
它没有一个特别知道，就是这个身体的这种知觉吧，就是身体接触的这个知觉，但实际上它是一种。
Is there a particular terminology?
没有一个专用词有的
couldn't find it. It would be better to have that. This awareness. In Chinese, it is awareness, but it would be better to have a particular word that's associated to the body.
比较清楚一点，每一个都有，每一个根呢有它有。
If we were to say seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, awareness and recognition, that might be easier. That might be more clear.
外面呢有了这个触啊，就是触的话呢，就刚才讲的，就是什么这个老也好啊，就是什么重也好。
Since there is the faculty of body, then there is the touch, and there is the awareness of heaviness or lightness or heat and hunger and so on. This kind of awareness. In the sutra, it says, apart from the two sets of defiling objects of separation and union and pleasures and the pleasantness and unpleasantness, the awareness of sensation is originally without a substance. This kind of awareness, there are the different kinds of sensations that's attached to it, such as the softness, gentleness, and roughness. In the past, whenever there's the empowerment, we would be presented with objects such as the very rough yak fur made of tent. And when you touch it, it's very rough. It's very difficult to touch it. And there are the other ones, that's such as brocade and katak, very silky and soft. That's very pleasant to touch. Whenever you touch it, it's almost like the clothing of the celestial beings, the really, really good ones. And then over here it says that let it be of separation and union, or with pleasantness and unpleasantness.
有些的话呢，就是它离开的时候呢，就是味，就是喝的时候呢，顺就是快乐。
There are different ways of explaining the separation and union. The separation and union can be combined with the unpleasantness and union with pleasantness. It could also be favorable and unfavorable in this way of explanation. In the Tibetan translation, it's translated as the ones that creates harm and creates benefits. And now let's look at the next verse. It says, thus, Ananda, you should know that this sensation does not come from separation and union, nor does it exist because of pleasantness and unpleasantness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. Again, the logic is to analyze the object and then analyze the subject and then analyze the emptiness. That, in fact, this sensation does not appear, or it's not a product of any of the three. Whenever we look at the object, the union and the separation of object, sometimes we would feel that there is a sensation that's attached to it. In fact, these are simply the illusion of ours. Is completely groundless. It is without any base, without any source. It is not from the object. It is not from the faculty. It is not derived from the emptiness. There is no source of such a sensation. But you simply feel that it is true. Therefore, it is a false sensation. It is a false grasping towards that kind of sensation as truly existent. For those of you who have sharp faculty or sharp capacity, you would be able to understand it now. According to Abhidharma, it says that there are the two types of sensation, one from the body and the other one from consciousness. Though that the sensation that we feel from the physical body needs to have the cooperation, so to speak, from the consciousness, but the body itself still has the sensation that is percepted through the faculty of body. We can make such observation. Our body constantly feels pleasant or unpleasant throughout the day, and we would seek for experience of pleasant. Not just the human beings, those birds, those little magpies and crows, when they're happy, they would also try to clean their fur, and they have their particular actions. And then whenever it is in the unfavorable conditions, that would create unfavorable sensations, such as rain rain or hail, and then they would try their best to hide in their body too. So we can see that the mundane beings simply are so deluded by our illusion. When we truly make the observation, the body itself, the body's sensation itself, the awareness itself doesn't have any birthplace. There is no place for it to be derived. The Buddha over here gives us the instruction to Ananda first and then to the sentient beings who kept on asking the questions such as the 6 entrances and the 5 aggregates. I think Ananda must be the manifested Shravaka because he wouldn't have any of those true graspings, but the sentient beings do. Therefore, he asks the questions in such a way so that we can be benefited through the teachings of the Buddha. The sentient beings' capacities are so different. The Buddha gives us so many different teachings, and we should see which particular teaching is very fitting to us. And then the next observation follows the same logic. For what reason the Buddha says if it arose when there was union, it would disappear when there was separation. So how could it sense the separation? Now, if the body's sensation when it arises from union, then separateness would be forever disappeared. In this way, how would one know that there is a separation? If the two hands were to touch, which is in union, and then part, at that time, one would not be able to know it. And then the Buddha said the two characteristics of pleasantness and unpleasantness are the same way. So if one were to feel pleasantness, then there would be no unpleasantness at all. If there's pleasantness of the object, then there would be no unpleasant character that's attached to object or vice versa. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of the 4 characteristics of union, separation, pleasantness, and unpleasantness, then awareness of physical sensations such as this would have no self-nature. In this way, Ananda, you should know that the body sensation, the physical sensation such as this, in fact, doesn't have any self-nature. This is the observation made from the object and subject. Suppose it came from emptiness. The awareness of sensation would be experienced by emptiness itself. What connection would that have with your entrance? If you were to feel all kinds of sensations, if you were to think that all kinds of sensations are in fact came from emptiness, then what does that have to do with you? Because if the emptiness would feel all the different sensations such as cold, hot, light, heavy, and all of those, then those sensations would be all pervasive in emptiness, since emptiness and space is all pervasive. Therefore, what does it have to do with you? Therefore, you should know that the body entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Now the next one, let's look at the faculty of intellect, which is a little bit difficult, a little bit more so than the previous 5. So you need to pay attention. Do not doze off. Pay close attention and investigate into your own wisdom, because it's a bit difficult for me. Now that I'm aging, I feel that I'm getting less intellectual. And whenever I read the classical Chinese, it is a bit difficult for me too, though that in my middle school I attended some classes for the classical Chinese, but it doesn't really help much. But I'm sure you would be okay since you've read so many books and you've studied a lot. For me, since I barely attended much of the middle school, it is a bit difficult for me to understand it, but maybe for you it should be fine. Sometimes I think to myself that I really wish that I would have read more and studied more when I was younger. I wish I had more opportunity. I heard the same aspiration from another young man from Tibet. He said that when he went to the cities, he really wished that his parents would have forced him to study more. Though that my parents didn't cause my situation, it was really the time, but still, I wish I studied more. I wish I had more of such opportunity. The Buddha then said, Ananda, consider, for example, a person who becomes so fatigued that he goes to sleep. Now we're going to talk about consciousness or intellect that is used in this translation. It says that this person felt really tired from work, from studying, from whatever kinds of chores that they need to do, and then he needs to do, and this person goes to sleep. Having slept soundly, he awakens and tries to recollect what he experienced while asleep. After feeling really tired, this person fell asleep. After he then awakens and tries to recollect what he experienced and tries to remember what he dreamt, whatever kinds of dreams that he had, maybe about sound, about form, about touch, that kind of dualistic experience he had in the dream. He then recalled some things and forgot some others. After he had the dream, he had those experiences, he had those dualistic thoughts, and he had those recollections, and then he forgot about some of them. So there are the 4 stages: the dream, awaken, recollection, and forget. Maybe you can relate to that too. Sometimes you would be able to remember and memorize some of the verses, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you would feel upset that you forget them, and sometimes you would feel happy that you remember those verses. So there's this kind of change and process. I know that there are people who are very good at memorizing or taking those words to heart, and they can memorize verses after reading for 3 times, and there are others who can't remember at all. Anyhow, this particular person goes through the 4 stages: the sleep, awaken, and recollect, and forget. Thus, his upside downness goes through production, dwelling, change, and extinction, which are taken in and returned to a center habitually. Each of those stages also follows the production, dwelling, change, and extinction, and each of them continuously to habituate this person. And then each following the next without ever being overtaken. The previous one would produce the next one. This is called the faculty of intellect, or faculty of consciousness, mind consciousness. That is to say that when it comes to the first stage, which is sleep, it has the production of sleep, dwelling of sleep, change of sleep, and extinction of sleep. To further demonstrate what it means is that when you fall asleep, at that time it is a production of sleep. When you get drowsy and started to feel sleepy and then fall asleep, that's the production. And then dwelling is when you keep sleeping, that is dwelling. And then when you start to get a little bit awake, and then that is a change of sleep. And then when you wake up, that is the extinction of sleep. But when you fall back to sleep, that is the extinct of awake, and then change to sleep again. So each of the stages have the 4 steps or the 4 stages. There's the production, dwelling, change, and extinction in sleep. Therefore, also associated to awake and recollection and forget. It is similar to when we talk about the 4 stages of any phenomena. It is the formation, duration, degradation, and empty. After taking the course of these 4 stages, it will then go back to consciousness. It is simply manifest out of the habitual tendency. And it is constant, continuous. It is not like the eye faculty, that is, whenever we look, we can look, glance at once, and then that's it. But consciousness, in fact, it has something that could be remained, that could be reminisced after. For example, after you finish dreaming, you can then wake up. After waking up, you can then recollect. After recollect, you can forget. After forget, you can go back to sleep again. So in our consciousness, it constantly rotates in such a way. Therefore, it is called the root of consciousness, the root of intellect. In the Abhidharma, it says that after the 5 consciousness, after it ceases the form, sound, smell, taste, and touch, after they ceased, then the consciousness, the root of consciousness would manifest. If it is not extinct, if it is not extinct, then the faculty of consciousness, the faculty of intellect will not manifest. At time of sleeping, the 5 root consciousness, according to Abhidharma, it is called the form consciousness, because they all have form. But the mental consciousness, the root of intellect, doesn't have any form. Therefore, it is completely part of the mind stream. Whenever we talk about dream, sleep, recollect, and forget, the 4 stages both have the production, dwelling, change, and extinction, which propels the consciousness to constantly rotate in the 4 stages. This is known as the mind organ or intellect. The mind and fatigue are both bodhi. Persistence produces the characteristic of fatigue. This particular logic is exactly the same as the previous one, that let it be the true or the false manifestation, they're still the manifestation of the bodhi. The 2 defiling objects of production and extinction stimulates a sense of knowing, which in turn grasps this inner sense data, reversing the flow of seeing and hearing. Before the flow reaches the ground, it is known as the faculty of intellect. Let it be the production or extinction, the whole process of mind consciousness, the production, the dwelling, the change, and extinction now are categorized as production and cessation.
外面的这个是往外，就是往外，就是无根的话，那就是往外，就是我们就是移民里面讲的是有个什么就是什么四个玻璃窗的
The 5 faculties that we talked about earlier
外面就是5个门当中就是看
are the 5 faculties that focus on the outside. In the Buddhist logic, we talk about the 5 faculties are just like the 5 glass windows, and mind consciousness is inside this room that has 5 glass windows. So the mind consciousness would then grasp on the inner sense data or the inner dust, but the other 5 root faculties would focus on the 5 outer defiling objects or defiling dust. Let's look at how the state of consciousness is. The 5 root, the 5 faculties flows outside. But at the state of mind consciousness, it then reverses the flow, start to flow inside. Before the flow reaches the ground, it is known as the faculty of intellect. When it flows inside, it doesn't truly touch the ground of the faculty of intellect. Why is that? Because the root of the faculty of intellect, it is a continuum. And within this continuum, it only captures the images of form, sound, touch, fragrance, and taste. Other than those images of it, other than those illusory images of it, there is no true form that can be perceived. The 5 faculties, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, these 5 form roots can gather the outer forms or gather all the things that they can perceive from the outside, and then they'll come back to the one that resides in the middle of the room. Or to give you an example, we send out 5 people to gather mushrooms so that they will come back with the mushroom and hand it to the cook, and then the cook will be able to make a dish. So the cook is the consciousness. It has never really went outside, but it simply stays on alaya and captures those sensory data, those illusions, those images. Do you understand it by now? Many different teachers have various ways of explaining it. Some of the teachers explained it this way, and I think it's easier to understand. If you understand what the mind consciousness or the faculty of the intellect is, then you should be clear about it. Apart from the 2 sets of defiling objects of waking and sleeping and of production and extinction, the faculty of intellect is originally without substance. Now, without the defiling object of waking and sleeping and the defiling dust of production and extinction, you would realize the faculty of intellect is originally without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that the faculty of intellect does not come from waking, sleeping, production, or extinction, nor does it arise from sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. So the Buddha over here says that if you were to say that it comes from sleeping, then how would you know that there is a waking? And if you were to say that it comes from waking, then how would you know that there is something that is sleeping? Maybe the Buddha here got a little tired, so he didn't really give the example of production and extinction. He the Buddha then expounded it more briefly, just like my class as well. I am briefly explaining it as well. The Buddha over here simply just gives one example and use the same logic. You can apply it to the production, the extinction, and the change, and so on. So you can apply to all the other aspects. But later, the Buddha did talk about a rise, talk about the production. So the Buddha said that if it came from production, it would cease to exist at the time of extinction. So how could it undergo extinction? If you were to say that it comes from production, then there would be no extinction, right? Therefore, how could someone know that there is non-extinction? This is again from the observation of object. If it were to be produced from the root, the subject that grasps onto the object, this part is a little bit difficult. So it says that supposedly it came from the sense organ. The sense organ we're talking about is from the faculty of intellect. Then waking and sleeping cause only a physical opening and closing respectively. We've already talked about how there are the two states, the waking and sleeping. But if you were to say that it came from sense organ, then you're to say that the waking and sleeping would cause a physical change or physical closing and opening. But we all know that sleeping is completely it is completely based on mind. If we don't have a mind, how would we know that if we're awake or if we're asleep? And then he continued to say that if this is not on the object, rather it comes from sense organ, then your physical opening, then the waking and sleeping would be based on the physical opening and closing. Since there is no mind, then it is completely based on the sense organs, the five organs. For example, when you're asleep, then all your five organs and all your limbs would start to curl up and close up. When you are awake, you would stretch out your limbs and your organs, and then you are waking. You're awake. But without mind, how would a person fall asleep or not? There would be no concept of it at all. Apart from the two movements, the faculty of intellect is as unsubstantial as flowers in space because it is fundamentally without a self-nature. Now, this part is a bit difficult to explain because previously we already explained how if it were to be produced from subject and if it were produced from object, and then apart from the two, instead of the two movements, I think instead of that it should be apart from the object and the subject. It then could be explained as a short summary to the previous two because all the previous five organs were explained in such a way. But a great numbers of masters explained altogether connected with sense organ. So that would be a bit difficult to explain or a little bit difficult to understand. Then you have to explain that apart from the two movements, then the faculty of intellect is unsubstantial as flowers in space, which could be difficult to understand, but you can read into it more and see if that's true. Suppose it came from emptiness, the sense of intellect would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mind. Then what connection would that have with your entrance? This one we have already explained previously as well. Therefore, you should know that the mind entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous. spontaneously in nature.